You're listening to the Final Say Radio Show, a Rappaport Media production, with your host Brett Rappaport and co-host John Rappaport.
We've got our first guest today, so let's move right along. I'm very pleased to have back with us Herb London with the Manhattan Institute. Herb, I hope you've had some safe travels abroad, and it's a pleasure to have you with us.
Well, thank you. Great pleasure to be with you as well.
Well, there's so many different things for us to touch on today, and if we can, I'd like to go domestic before we go to a couple foreign policy issues. We've seen the great debate going on, actually lack of debate in the immigration policy, and of course we've seen the mad push for gun legislation, which really doesn't address any of the issues that, for why we may need some changes in gun laws. If we look at some of the psychological issues of certain peoples who've carried out some of the more recent acts involving guns. But Herb, what are your thoughts on the immigration bill and specifically the push by members of the Republican Party in trying to make this happen?
Well, look, I think that you've got to be very careful about what you wish for. The Republicans, I think, are very much concerned about the Hispanic vote. By and large, that's driving the discussion. But one of the important dimensions of all of this is what does it mean for the country? We want people in the United States who want to be American, who want to live here, who want to imbibe our language, who want to develop an understanding of our customs, who want to be Americans in every sense. If, in fact, this is merely a refuge for those who want to earn a decent income or have no other way of earning an income and send that money back home to their relatives, I'm not sure that this is always advisable. So when we talk about the temporary employees who come to the United States to work in the hospitality industry, for example, or picking fruits, I think we have to be very careful about the people that come. I've been told, and again, there's a recent book by the former governor of Florida, Mr. Bush, as well as a number of his colleagues, that suggests that we've got to increase the number of people who are engaged in this kind of activity because this is work Americans do not want to engage in. I don't buy that argument for a second. If you increase the price of a cabbage by 1 cent and you increase the wages that people receive, you'll find people who want to engage in this kind of employment. What it is a form of exploitation for people who are receiving low-wage jobs. So I don't buy the argument at all, and I think that we have to be very careful about how we expand the number of people who are coming into the country. My other feeling about it is that the 1965 Act, which is the Family Unification Act, makes no sense at all. The people who should come into the country are those who benefit America and want to be Americans. Skilled workers should be those who are given the highest priority. So if they have certain skills that others do not possess and some ways benefit America in the process, those are the people we should concentrate on. So those would be my two responses to the immigration bill. And presumably this is now the Schumer bill. He's the one who's been driving this, and he's managed to gain the support of a couple of Republicans. But I think Republicans have to be very careful about what they're buying into.
Well, I agree with you completely, and it's a very good assessment that you have there. And I was watching the news cycle and just seeing a picture of John McCain standing next to Chuck Schumer and Robert Menendez, and I'm thinking to myself, we're in for something really bad here. I mean, I cannot support this. And I always felt this. Any type of change that we're going to have in our immigration policy has to accomplish two things. The first thing should be absolutely protecting not just the southern border, but the northern border with Canada, ensuring that, that there's no loose holes or openings for terrorists to come in from, and that we're also securing our ports. Once we've done that and we've ensured the American people that 11 million more over the next decade aren't going to sneak in, then we could start addressing the issues. But we have to look at it from the perspective of national security and the interest of the American people, not the interest of everyone else, which is what we tend to do here.
Well, I couldn't agree with you more. I think that's exactly right. We did have an immigration reform bill, you may recall, roughly 2 decades ago. It didn't accomplish very much, and at the time it was argued that this would stifle the number of illegals coming into the United States. And in fact, that didn't occur at all. It encouraged illegals because of the benefits that someone gets as soon as he crosses that border and enters the United States. So we have to be very careful about the kind of incentives or disincentives that are provided. And again, I'm not sure sufficient thought has been given to that matter. But you've got it exactly right. The first and overarching responsibility should be to provide for the security of the United States.
Why is the president and why are these, the Gang of Eight, if we call them that, why are they in such a rush to pass this immigration bill, and why aren't they ready to have an open dialogue with the American people?
I think that the issue is largely political. It's become thoroughly politicized, and there is the belief, and perhaps an appropriate belief on the part of the Democratic Party, that most of these people who will gain access to voting booths in the United States are going to pull a Democratic lever. I think that's what's driving the decision. And the Republicans, I think, are very much concerned that, in fact, we've got to do something about the Hispanic vote in the United States. It is growing in large measure. It is, in fact, the fastest-growing group in the United States. We can't lose them completely. We're not going to gain a majority, but we certainly have to get close to 50% of the Hispanic vote in order to be successful. So I think there are political decisions driving both parties at the moment.
Yeah, that's very well said, Herb. I think the challenge here is, and it's a cart before the horse, right? Like Brett very much, like probably you and I and many other conservatives feel like first secure the borders and then let's have an intelligent discourse about how our policies, what kind of immigration stance we should take, who we want in this country, how we want to let them in, et cetera. But the challenge here is the Republicans seem to it's like they've already lost. They've said to themselves, this is the way the future is going to be, and we'll just have to acquiesce to it and pray that these people, because they may have conservative religious beliefs, because many of them are Catholics, for example, and they might respect life, that we might be able to reach out to them instead of making a clear, articulated case for why Reagan-like conservatism and constitutional respect for liberty is the most important thing, and hopefully win back the country on that merit. I think if we go down this path with the Republicans, the Republican Party will likely just fade and morph out, and some other second party will arise in the future.
Well, Chesterton once made the argument that there's one of the things that you have to worry about is if you believe pragmatism actually works. And I don't mean that in a facetious sense. I mean, this is a practical decision on the part of the Republican Party based on the arithmetic associated with the political evolution in the country. It should be based on certain kinds of principles. What does liberty mean? How do we protect our liberty, and under what circumstances? What kind of benefits do immigrants deserve? And when you consider the fact that 55% of Hispanics have their children out of wedlock, many of them want to buy into the social network in the United States. And one, I don't think that the United States can afford it. And two, the Republicans cannot possibly compete with the Democrats on that basis. They've got to compete against them on the basis of principle and why America is the unique and idiosyncratic nation it is.
Well, or hopefully we will still be. At least we know we used to be, Herb. I'll give you a quick
I was going to say, I mean, the country's changing. I keep asking myself the question, do I live in America? And it's certainly not the America that I was raised in, and the changes that have occurred have been very worrisome for me.
And it doesn't bother me so much what people look like. I don't even care what their accents are like. I really want them to buy into what made this country great and what will sustain us. But I want to make the point as we transition to talk about sequester politics. I know, and I can't go into too much detail, but I have a friend of mine who's working on a very expensive project. So here we are. Every time we turn around, I have the pre-pass so I could get on a flight faster, but they keep shutting the lines down, and the guys look at me as 20 of them stand around doing nothing, telling me it's sequester, right? But I have a friend who's writing a very expensive multi-$10 million contract for the government to spend money, and it's all about marketing outreach to tell poor people, many of them illegal or what's a new word we're supposed to use, illegal aliens.
Undocumented.
About all the, I'm sorry, I refuse to use that word. But all these free services that they can get. So all the hardworking Americans are being told we can't have everything we touch seems to be affected by sequester, as though they cut 30 to 40% out of the entire budget, not 2.5 or 3%. But they're spending ridiculous amounts of money we don't have to buy these future votes, and we have to find a way to stop that.
Well, I mean, part of the difficulty is that this is all a ruse. When you talk about sequester, what they're really talking about is hollowing out the military. The third rail in American politics, Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security will not be touched. And so a lot of it is just patently silly. I mean, you're not going to have tours in the White House because of sequester. Everything is related to the sequestration. It's absurd on its face. So, I mean, people should be able to see through that. Nonetheless, it's an argument that is being used by the government at the moment. There's no doubt that there should be some belt-tightening, but there are so many areas of wasteful spending in the government. If you and I had the opportunity to go through the budget line by line, we could easily eliminate 15% of the budget without worrying about any significant change in American life. But the problem is that there are so many people who have special interests that are given some consideration when the budget is created. That's the problem. It's a special interest budget. And when you organize a budget in that fashion, there are things that you simply can't cut because you owe a great deal to a great many.
What I like to do is I like to go back to before Barack Obama took the office of presidency, where we had a $2.5 to $2.8 trillion budget range, and it seemed to me that we had Fleet Week and people were visiting the White House and planes were taking off and landing in a relatively, of course we have late arrivals and late departures, but pretty normal procedure. And now we're almost at a $4 trillion a year budget, and we try to cut just a little bit, a couple cents on a dollar, and the earth is coming to its end.
Well, what you have to understand is that the attitude on the part of this administration is really the redistribution of wealth. Yeah. And if you think about that as the basis for all of these decisions, the budget, the taxes, everything becomes a reflection of this basic and underlying concern. How do you redistribute wealth in America? And that is what's happening. It is happening on every level. And it's a very worrisome development because, as you and I know, this is not America. America is predicated on the idea that liberties will prevail and that people are obviously, some are going to do better than others, but we can't create a kind of egalitarian economic system. Not everyone is going to be the same, but this is what the administration, this particular administration, is attempting to achieve. So it is a windfall. It's a change of very, very significant proportions in outlook and in basic assumptions.
And to come back to what you brought up earlier with Governor Bush's book, discussing the fact that we need to bring in people from other countries to fill jobs that Americans won't, it seems to me that we have an awful, tens of millions of Americans who are either underemployed or not employed at all, who at some time, if you ended the social welfare support, they would take these jobs. In fact, like you said, if you just paid 2 more cents or 5 more cents for a loaf of bread or a gallon of milk or whatever it is, you could afford to pay them more.
I think that's exactly right. I don't. In fact, I find rather offensive the argument there are some jobs Americans will simply not take. I just don't buy it. All of my life as a youngster, I did everything. I mean, I would clean tables, I'd clean toilets. It didn't make any difference. It was the very fact that I had a job that was significant. And I think for many Americans, the same view still prevails. The unfortunate thing, however, is if you're told this is not a job for you, it really is a job for someone who's come into the country and will take a minimum wage. That's not an acceptable view in my judgment.
That's absolutely right. If we can we turn our attention overseas? I'm greatly disturbed. I don't want to spend too much time discussing the what happened in Boston unless you have a few comments, only because we have so many things that we need to really investigate, and I hope that they will and properly look into the associations and the contact that these two brothers have had over the last few years, so we could make sure that there aren't other people who participated within that.
Well, I just came back yesterday from a trip abroad. I went to Poland with the members of the Israeli Defense Force, went to Auschwitz and Birkenau, and then from there flew to Israel for the 65th anniversary of the country. So for me, this was a very special occasion. The 65th anniversary of Israel represents a great deal when you consider that this country is smaller than the state of New Jersey, and yet it has F-16s and is capable of defending itself and represents a bastion of liberty in a sea of what can only be described as dictatorships and failed nations. It's quite remarkable that this state survives. So I'd love to chat about that because for me this was a kind of experience. I've been to Israel 20, 30 times, but when you travel with the IDF and particularly go to the camps and raise the Israeli flag at Birkenau, Auschwitz and Birkenau, that suggests a great deal to me. You go from the depths of despair where people were helpless, hopeless in the face of the Nazi war machine, and now you see these young Israelis who are resilient, who are firm, who are tough, who are smart, and who represent their country and the interests of Jews worldwide. Is quite an extraordinary and inspirational moment.
I'm glad you bring that up, Herb. I find fascinating, more than almost anything else about Israel, the fact that it shows exactly what this country can accomplish. Israel is made up, it's basically comprised of people who had everything against them. They had to survive. In many cases, they came with virtually nothing except the willingness to work together individually and collectively to accomplish a goal. And they were not going to take no for an answer because they knew, Herb, that if they were not successful, they would die. And I'm not saying Americans should die if they're not successful. What I'm saying is people are amazingly capable of surviving the most outrageous hardships. And if we take away things like shame, if we take away things like reward, and if we take away the stimulus to have to work hard, then you get what we have as a trend line in America. We have to look no further than Israel to say that the lowest of the low in this country, the ones with the least amount of education, skill sets, and family structure, if given the adequate tension and some support and basic resources, could all, in only a generation, accomplish great things if we only turn off the public trough.
Well, I happen to have great faith in human ingenuity, and you're absolutely right. You see it in Israel. I mean, Israel has everything working against it. In fact, when I've been asked in writing to describe what Israel is, I always describe it as a bumblebee, because if you look at the laws of thermodynamics, the bumblebee has far too much weight to fly with these very small wings that it has. And you would say this bug cannot possibly fly. And yet it defies the laws of aerodynamics and does fly. Well, this is the story of Israel. There are 275 million Arabs that want to kill every Jew in Israel. There's a Byzantine political system with far too many parties and far too many people on the take. You've got an odd economic system that still has the residual effects of the kibbutz, which was an unworkable system. And yet this country soars. How is it that it soars? How does this country manage to be successful? It is not merely the miracle. It is the individual ingenuity that has been set free in a land where liberty prevails. And that, I think, is the story of Israel. It's a remarkable story, and it does provide lessons for us. This country is 335 miles long. At its widest point, it's 63 miles. At its narrowest width, it's 8 miles. It's a tiny nation. It's smaller than New Jersey. And yet this nation has F-16s to defend itself, Apaches that fly all day and night in order to take out rocket launchers from Gaza and elsewhere. I mean, with remarkable ingenuity in Tel Aviv, where you have the Silicon Valley of the Middle East, where you have 50% of the NASDAQ, all of the NASDAQ listings coming from Israeli companies. It is a remarkable story, and a story that I think demonstrates something about human ingenuity.
And the funny thing about this whole story is you look on the other side of the border at the Palestinians, and they represent perfectly where this country is heading. They represent the Obama nation of a bunch of people who would rather complain and hold their hand out than, and that's not to say with a wide brush that there's not people there with given a better governance, would be willing to work hard. It's to say that as a general rule, the Palestinian mass has their hand out, is begging the world for money, is blaming everybody else for their circumstances, instead of just saying, wait a minute, we have land, we have families, we're alive, we have water, and all we have to do is put our energies towards producing something instead of either complaining or destroying something, and we too could accomplish great things in 1 or 2 decades.
Well, if you said to the people in the Palestinian territory in both Gaza as well as the West Bank, it's not Hamas that's going to provide for you. It's yourself. You are going to be responsible for taking care of yourself. If the message was a different message, where in fact you don't rely on a handout from other nations, you've got to make a go of it, and you can make a go of it, yeah, I think that you're right. I think it would be a very different kind of environment, and the Israelis would be quite willing to help. But if the goal is, the narrative is, look, we've been deprived of our land, which they believe is theirs, and at the same time we feel abused and exploited by Israelis, then what you get is nothing but resentment. That resentment translates into violent behavior. That violence doesn't lead anywhere. It really cannot lead anywhere. In the end, that's not a policy prescription for success.
No, it's sort of disappointing because when I went to my university, there were several books written between, I'd say around 1983 to 1990, talking about peace in Lebanon between, Arabs and Jews. And then not long after that period, it seems like those who were looking for peace were overrun by those that wanted to continue the conflict in and around Israel. And so that part's troublesome. But I have a question. While you were over there, John Kerry has been overseas visiting quite a few countries trying to work on whether it be the peace agreement with Palestinian or better relations with Turkey or whatever's going on in Syria and so on and so forth. Were there any interesting things that you heard or that you could provide in a perspective from people over in the Middle East?
Look, there's nothing that Kerry is offering that's new. I spent an hour speaking to Bibi Netanyahu, and the proposals are all reworked, revisited proposals. They've all been discussed before. It's the belief that, well, if you simply say it often enough, maybe it'll be imbibed. The first and overarching goal should be recognition of the State of Israel. If Arabs would just simply say, we recognize this State of Israel, we recognize it as an entity that is going to be here, that would be an extraordinary first step. And the Israelis would do an awful lot in response. If tomorrow, now we're speaking theoretically, the Israelis were to give up all of their weapons, simply say we're not going to defend ourselves, there'd be no State of Israel. Every Jew would be eliminated. If the Arabs were to say we give up all of our weapons, we're not going to attack Israel any longer, they would flourish, and the whole Middle East would flourish. So the answer is very clear. The narrative on the part of the Arabs has to change. They have to say, we'll recognize Israel, we're not going to engage in violence, and you will see a very different kind of Middle East. What the actual solution will be in the distribution of land is not critical, because Barak was willing to give up 96% of the West Bank, and it was still rejected. And it was the old line, the Arabs will never find a way to reject an opportunity. And this was an opportunity for them. So the goal here is very clear. Forget about the details. The large question that has to be addressed is, will the Arabs recognize the State of Israel as a Jewish state, period? If they do, not only will peace flourish, but you would see the economies flourish as well.
That's an excellent point. Well, Herb, we're coming up at the end of our segment here. I want to thank you so much for taking your time to join us, and we'd love to have you back on soon to continue this conversation. It is very
always
important.
A pleasure to be with you. Happy to do it.
Thank you very much, Herb. Herb London at the Manhattan Institute. It's always a pleasure.